Hello, and welcome to episode number 199 of the Lines Podcast. My name is Matt Brown. I am joined by Stephen Andress, and I could not be more excited. You can see I have my quarter zip on. You can see Stephen has his tchotchke hat on over there. You know what this means. It is golf podcast time, fellas. It is golf season kicking off. First full field event going on over there in Hawaii. Stephen, I am super excited. Listen, we had a really good golf year last year. Probably not, if we're just being honest, probably not duplicatable. I mean, like that was and the most insane, absurd golf season that one could ever have. That being said, I think we figured out a lot of stuff. I think that we're on to a lot of good stuff here as well. We got some great new guys that are going to be contributing at the various sites and even here on YouTube and on the podcast as well. So maybe we can keep this going, man. I thought maybe that was a once in a lifetime golf season last year, but hey, I'm going to try like hell to top it.
I thought so too, man. Nothing gets me more excited than having a Sunday sweat for a golf outright. Last year, I was fortunate enough to hit as long as 130 to 1 in the 3M Open on Cam Champ, and then what do you know? First week last week in the Tournament of Champions, and I hit Cam Smith 22 to 1. So it's been a great start to the year. We have a new freelancer, John Hasselbauer, joining Tyler Duke in our golf coverage at thelines.com. They go so in depth each week on these tournaments. I love it. If you're a golf bettor, it is the best spot for you to go.
So let's talk the Sony Open here, course breakdown and key stats. So these are going to be the overall thoughts of the course, and then just what Stephen and I kind of weighed in our models as we were building things out, how we were whittling this field down to the golfers that we want to get on our betting card. It's at Wailea Country Club again. This is the air quote Hawaii swing. They'll be out of there after this one. It's a short course, just over 7,000 yards. It's a par 70, so you're going to get four par threes. You're going to get 4 par threes. You're going to get 12 par fours, and you're only going to get 2 par fives in this one. It is Bermuda greens. If you want to go in and start to kind of compare statistics on Bermuda greens, if you think there is an advantage to people who putt well on Bermuda. It's a Seth Rayner course. There was a couple other guys that had some involvement, but pretty much a Seth Rayner course if you want to compare courses like that. What we're looking at from a cut line standpoint, we're usually in that a couple under par-ish range. So that's kind of the type of golfer you're looking for that can at least get you a couple under par after the first 2 rounds and hang around for the weekend so that anything can happen for you there. And if you're looking for some comp courses, Harbor Town tends to be the one that everybody really flocks to. Sedgefield seems to be another course that everybody flocks to as far as comparable courses. Sea Island is another one that I've seen that people are looking at as far as kind of comp courses and things like that. And so, Stephen, typically this would be where we would talk about, hey, look, the winds can get really terrible here. The rain can get really terrible here. But the forecast as of Wednesday morning, when we are recording this, calls for pretty mild winds and doesn't call for a lot of rain. So it doesn't look like that factor of this course is going to come into play this week.
Looks like beautiful Hawaii weather for this tournament. The one thing I would say is I would caution people trying to ride a hot player from last week into this week's course, because Kapalua and Waialae are very different. Kapalua is long and wide open and rolling hills, and you can bomb away, and it favors long hitters, whereas this week's course, much shorter. Driving accuracy matters this week. Short game and putting matters this week. So other than the greens both being Bermuda, there's not much similarities. And the one thing that stood out to John Hasselbauer in his tournament preview on thelines.com is how there are a lot of par 4s in that 400 to 450, but there's also 6 par 4s in the 450 to 500 range. So that was a key stat for me this week.
Experience does seem to matter here at this course as well. Russell Henley's the lone debutant to win this thing in the last 16 years. So it seems like guys that have played this before tend to do better here. If you do go back and you're just trying to look at comps you're trying to look at some stats, like the 2020 edition of this tournament, I'm not saying throw out. What I am going to say is that thing was a complete mess. There was a just torrential rainfall. The whole tournament was a lift, clean in place tournament. It was tons and tons and tons of wind and stuff like that. So just as you're doing your statistics, if you find something in 2020 and you're like, oh, okay, well, this seems really interesting. I'm not saying throw it out. I'm just saying take it with a grain of salt. 2020 edition was a complete mess. That being said, this year for this one, there has been 20 inches of rain on this course since the middle of December. But as we mentioned, does not look like there's going to be rain this week. But Stephen, I am at least expecting, just from that massive amount of rain, the temperatures are fairly mild. It's not like you're getting super, super hot over there to dry this thing out. Like I do at least think that the conditions will be soft and softer than, just typical, based off of just the massive amount of rain that this course has gotten over the last month and a week or so.
Softer than usual, I would anticipate. I think it won't matter off the tee because it's already one of the shorter courses on tour, but certainly with hitting these greens, they should be easier. So maybe we see a little bit lower final score for the winner. Maybe we see something in the low 20s this week where we haven't seen that in some years in the past. According to Data Golf, Waialae is second only to Augusta in terms of predictive course history. So like you said, it is a good week to look at some past results to see who also has played here, but with that caveat of 2020 just being a weird year and having to catch the right end of the break, whether you played in the morning wave or the afternoon wave a year ago. So I would toss that. But overall, you are right. It is a course that course history does at least tell us a little bit more than a lot of these tournaments.
So some key stats that I looked at, I'm interested to see what you kind of looked at and plugged in. I went strokes gained approach. I went pretty heavy on that. 27% of the model weighted into that. Fairways gained for me, also very heavy. 27% of the model weighted into that one as well. Now, I never really do this, but I did this for this course strictly based off of what, what we talked about with the conditions and the way that this course plays. So I did fairways gained. I also did good drives, which I really don't ever put the two in the same model, but I wanted to see who is going to be out there hitting these fairways, who is not going to be playing from. Again, I think it'll be wetter, softer, whatever. I don't think you want to be in the rough. I don't think you want to be off of these fairways. I think you just want to have a clean shot in. That's how you're going to be able to score in this one. So I did good drives as well. Proximity 150 to 175. A lot of the approaches are going to be a little bit less than that 150, maybe a little bit more than the 175, with a lot kind of falling in that range. So I took the middle. I split the difference there and went 150 to 175 on the approach. I did put in, which I rarely ever do, and we'll talk about this over the course of the golf season, Stephen, when it comes to stats that we like. I did put in putting this week. I don't ever really ever do that. I'm a guy that is super big on, hey, a putter can run hot, a putter can run cold. But if you look at this tournament in particular, everybody that wins this tournament is in the top 10 in putting. I mean, like outside of Kevin Na, he was 23rd in the field. Everybody's top 10 in putting. And so it's just something about this particular course and tournament and the way this thing plays out. People just putt well if they're going to do well here. And then, as you mentioned on those par fours, I went ahead and shaded to a little bit the longer ones. So I weighted in how players have done on par fours, 450 to 500. So those are the stats that I haven't had in the model this week. Curious to see what our overlap was and where you went different from me.
We're always going to overlap, I think, on strokes gained approach. That is the one stat I have in my model every single week. It's the most important stat to me. Doesn't matter if it's a short course. We have some overlap here. I also have fairways gained in my model. Like you, I rarely put putting in my model, but I did this week. I only gave it 3% though. So I'm curious how much you gave it in a week where you typically don't use it.
I gave it 8%, which is more than again, I hardly ever use it. Two, I gave it more than I normally do. And when I do ever end up using it, mainly because, like I said, it's hard to ignore that people have putted well and had success here at this tournament, right? It's very, very hard to ignore for me. And so that being said, you'll see some of the guys that I'm on, that I'm not married to the fact that you need to be ranked highly in the strokes gained putting aspect of everything.
Sure. Yeah. The other overlaps that we have, I also have proximity in there at the distance you had. I added a little bit. I have 150 to 175, but I also have 175 to 200 because I want to know which of these short hitters can still get pretty close to these holes on the when they're not hitting long drives, but on these longer par fours that are 450 to 500. And I also have par four scoring for those 450 to 500 as well as the 400 to 450. So a little bit mixed in there. Greens and regulation gain, strokes gain tee to green, strokes gain short game. Very balanced model for me this week, as opposed to a lot of weeks where I might have strokes gain approach at 25% and a couple others at 15%. Pretty much 10 to 12% across the board here, with the exception of strokes gained putting and strokes gained approach, which is a little bit less for putting, a little bit more for the strokes gained approach.
Awesome. Yeah. I mean, I like to see that we have a lot of overlap. I like to see that, we're kind of going about it a little bit differently from the weighting standpoint, because I think that'll give everybody listening here a decent idea of, which golfers were kind of coming up, no matter how you weighted the models and no matter how you weighted some of the statistics out there. All right, so let's talk some of our outright bets here for this one. And again, we will talk all of our other bets outside of just outrights. We'll talk long shots that we have in the account, but let's talk these outright bets, Stephen, that we've got that are kind of dudes that it's not like we're not taking shots on bombs here. These are the guys that, we have good, confident outright bets in, and we'll talk about the long shots that we're on a little bit later. The first one for me, and like I said, this will let you know right out of the gate whenever I say that even though I put strokes gained putting in my model this week, it does not mean that I'm married to it, because the first guy that I have an outright ticket on this week is Corey Connors. And the reason being is Corey Connors in the 36 round, in the 24 round, and even in the 12 round model that I ran, Corey Connors in the top 5 in all 3 of those. He is third actually in the 36 round. He is third in the 24 round and finds himself at 4th in the 12 round. And it's, you look across and you're like, well, why wouldn't you want to play this guy? Look, he's 6th in the field in the last 36 rounds, strokes gains approach. He's 10th in fairways gain. He's 6th in good drive. So he's got all of that going for you. Yes, everything looks great. Then you get strokes gained putting, Stephen, 101st in this field in strokes gained putting. So again, I'm not married to the putting statistic. I was just curious. I wanted to see where the guys that I'm on, where they stack up to the field here. But everything else that I'm looking for in this tournament, Corey Connors brings to the table, and it's just too hard for me to ignore that. It doesn't matter how far I go back or how recent I look, and every single one of these categories that I'm looking at outside of the putting, he is right up there at the top of the field.
He's top 10 in 5 of the metrics that I have in the model that I'm using this week. And he's similar to a couple different guys for me. And same thing happened with me. He still peaked into my top 10 over the last 50 rounds. I think that's one area, by the way, that I think you and I are going to be a little bit different here. I'm looking more long range than I have most weeks. Like in the middle of the season, I'm going to look at last 36 rounds, maybe even last 24 rounds. But for this week, with a lot of these guys playing their first tournament after a decent break here, I want to look a little bit more long range. So maybe that's where we have a little bit of a difference in our outright cards. But the one similarity for sure is that a guy like Corey Connors in the top 10 for me, a guy like Russell Henley as well, Keegan Bradley, Emiliano Grillo, these guys that can't putt a lick, but they're still popping in the top 10 of this model because they are pretty good in all of these other categories. So I know Russell Henley's another guy that you're looking at as well.
Yeah, so as far as these guys that are not like super long shots, though, you're getting a pretty juicy number on these guys. I mean, Stephen, if you look at our odds comparison tool, what's the best number you can get on Corey Connors right now? I mean, it's still probably pretty good in the 20s, right? I would imagine.
Yeah, let me see here. Over at thelines.com, if you go to the bottom of our Sony Open tournament preview, you will find the odds comparison tool. And there's a 22-1 out there.
Yeah.
It was 25 at one shop. I think that's come down a little bit, but at worst 22-1 as we record this Wednesday morning. The
two other guys that I have in here, and we talked a little bit about this before we got to recording, that you were saying, hey, look, I don't blame you because they're super high in my models as well. Just couldn't quite get there. Russell Henley and Taylor Gooch are the other two outright bets that I kind of have in this range right here. In the ones that I feel pretty solid, pretty good about, that I wouldn't consider to fall into that long shot range. With Henley, again, you go across and you just look at this model, and like the guy is so good at approach. He's so good when we're talking the proximity that I was looking at as well. He plays these 450-ish to 500 par fours well as well. And then you start to look a little bit further down, and yeah, he's not the greatest putter long term, but if you look at a little bit more recent, he's actually not as bad as, not as bad as he has been over a while.
So that's putting, right? It's streaky.
Yeah,
that's putting.
Yeah. And so you look at 20, like over the last 24 rounds, as opposed to the last, let's call it 50. Over the last 24 rounds, he does find himself 45th in this field. And, look, that's decent. That's not the worst thing in the world there, but really it's all the other stats that pop for me on Russell Henley that really have him up there for me. And then as far as Taylor Gooch, I mean, no player out there has climbed the world golf rankings like Taylor Gooch has. I mean, it's kind of under the radar for guys, especially Stephen, that, you and I follow golf super heavily, but I think that people that don't follow golf, I don't think Taylor Gooch even pops up on their radar, probably don't even know the name. But this is a guy who quietly, over the last 24 rounds, he is second overall in this field in strokes gained approach. He is 15th in good drive, so he's finding fairways. The approach game is really, really good. He is getting not having to scramble very much as well. Again, the reason he's just not at the top of a lot of the models, if you look, strokes gained putting, 66th in the field when it comes to this. So I am going with a lot of guys that don't really fit the strokes gained putting model here. I just wanted to look at it, weigh it in, have an effect on where these guys pop. But the fact that these guys are still popping so incredibly high with the poor putting, that just lets me know that they're everything that I'm looking for outside of the putting. And I'll hope that the flat stick can get hot over 4 days. So those are the three kind of in this, let not call it the long shot range that I'm on: Connors, Henley, and Gooch.
Yeah, I think people are listening wondering, why we're not playing some of the favorites here. And I think the prices are just too short, right? Yeah. The guys like Cam Smith, who won last week, is a single digit favorite. Webb Simpson, who has done everything but win at this event, is shorter than 20-1. Sung J M shorter than 20-1. Just not really appetizing prices, right? Even Mark Leishman, who's been getting some bets here, has dropped below 20-1 at this point. So it's just a good tournament with a lot of these guys coming off a layoff to take a shot a little further down the board and try and find, especially when they're climbing as high in our models this week as they are. So a little context on that. I did find it interesting, Matt, that Russell Henley was first in my model over the last 100 rounds and better putting in there, still around middle of this field, but better putting over that span than he has been over the past 50 rounds. So maybe you can forgive the putting a little bit less this week, and he is a past winner here. So I might have to reconsider not having Russell Henley on my betting card, to be quite honest with you. But the three that stood out to me, let's start with a guy who has the same exact odds at one shop as Russell Henley. Abraham Answer, for me, was my first outright bet.
Okay.
Past winner, won the WGC FedEx St. Jude last year in a smaller field, but loaded, a lot more loaded with better golfers than what's in this one. Number one in my model over the last 50 rounds. Top 30 in 8 of the 10 statistical categories I have in my model, and the other 2, top 40. So really clean profile across the board here for this week. That included top 3 in par 4 scoring from those 2 distances that we care most about, 400 to 450, 450 to 500, which I think is huge this week because if he's getting close to the hole from those distances, there's, a third of the course or more at that 450 to 500 par 4 range. The next guy I popped in, 46-1, Seamus Power, who I think has really been coming on strong here, really improved his game. 46-1, fourth over the last 50 rounds in the model I'm using, second over the last 36 rounds behind only Sung J M. And you're getting more than double the odds of Sung J M. Mm-hmm. So another guy that I liked. And lastly, a guy who May not fit the model as well this week, but kind of a head scratcher for me with where his odds were. And they were even longer than this. They've shortened since we were recording this. I know you've liked this guy, Jason Kokrak, 46-1 for a guy who's won 3 times since last October. I mean, we talk about win equity all the time and chasing some of these guys who've never won on the tour. And here's a guy who's won 3 times on tour over the past 15 months or so at 46-1. He is top 20 over the last 100 rounds in the model this week, and he's been strong in both approach and strokes gained putting. So the concern for me this week is that he's kind of been spraying it around off the tee. He's also lost 5 yards in distance off the tee since last year's statistics. It's early in the year, but that's curious to me. He is an older guy, so I don't know what's going on there with his distance. But this is also a course where I care less about distance off the tee. So a guy who's won 3 times and as strong as he is on approach and putting really stood out to me.
Let's talk some of these other bets that we have in our account. And guys, listen, this is one of the, if you're just kind of dipping your toe into golf betting and this is your first time that you're really like listening to this and getting involved. Look, outrights are sexy, and that's why we talk about them first. And everyone, those are the tickets that you see on Twitter, and everyone's jumping up and down because I hit XYZ outright. That is also the way to drain your bankroll into absolutely nothing and having to redeposit in some point in the middle of the golf season. You have to play these other markets out there to keep your bankroll steady. And it's not sexy to have a plus 120 or a plus 160 on a guy to finish top 20 or to finish top 10 or whatever it might be or something like that. But here, that is how you keep your golf bankroll healthy. Between hitting some of these outrights, you might go 5, 6, 7, 8 tournaments between hitting outrights. And if you were just only playing outrights and constantly draining your bankroll, you're going to look up and you're going to be like, oh my God, I got to deposit. I mean, and so Stephen, it's one of the things that I tell people. The first thing they ask me, hey man, who you on in golf this week? I'll tell them a top 20 bet before I even tell them an outright bet, because I'm like, I cannot drive home enough how important it is to play these head-to-heads, to play these top 20s, these top 10s, these other markets that are available out there. I mean, listen, just go to one of the sites and start messing around. You can see, they'll give you tons of ways. You can go to DraftKings right now. They have nationality props up, top American, top European, top Asian, top whatever. I mean, there are so many other ways to play these tournaments where the odds, yes, are not quite as sexy, but it's way easier to cash the tickets, and it keeps your golf bankroll healthy.
100%. I couldn't agree more. And just for perspective, the way I bet outrights is pretty simple. It's the same exact way our freelancer does it. If you follow golf Twitter, a lot of guys do the same thing. I wager about 3 units each week on outrights. Try to get at least 8 units of profit, maybe even more than that. This week I'm going for 20 units of profit. 8 units was wrong. I apologize. That was wrong. Let me say that from the top. 3 units each week on my outrights. This week, that's going to turn into 20 units of profit. So I'm looking for somewhere around that range on a weekly basis. And depending on who's popping in the model, it might be a shorter card with less names. If it's favoring that happens a lot in the majors. But a week like this, I might have 8 or 9 outrights this week. In fact, I am going to have 8 or 9 outrights this week. And if any one of them wins, I'm going to have 20 units of profit. So that's kind of how I take it. And I'm going to tell you now, you can go 4 or 5 weeks without hitting one, and you got to be prepared for that. That's the ebbs and flows of a golf season.
So let's look at some of these other markets in here. And guys, so this is just my style of golf betting, and this is not for everyone. So for example, I'm on Corey Connors, Russell Henley, Taylor Gooch for outrights in the kind of like shorter-ish outright range. For me, I'm never going to put in those tickets and not have either a top 5 or a top 10 on those guys as well, right? Because I'm not going to get a narrow miss. I'm not going to be, air quotes, right about a guy and then come away completely empty-handed, right? And so anytime I have, a guy that's in that shorter-ish range, I'm going to have either a top 5 or a top 10 bet on those guys as well. So you can go ahead and put in as far as other bets that are going to be in my account this week. Connors, Henley, Gooch are going to be, there's going to be top 10 bets in my account on those guys because I'm not going to be right and then still come away empty-handed. on those type of bets. But it's funny because some of the guys that you mentioned are some of the guys that I actually have top 20 bets on this week. So you just went
That's so funny because some of the guys you mentioned are guys that I have top 20 bets on.
So you just went like the opposite direction to me. So I have a top 20 on Abe Answer. And again, guys, it's not sexy, but this is how you grind out. Like it's plus 110. Like for Abe Answer to finish top 20. But this is a super talented guy on a course that fits his skill set. I don't love the win equity, even though it's the guy that can win and has won and all that. It's just Abe Answer to me is like your prototypical awesome top 20 bet because he is going to get there more times than not. I'm on Seamus Power on the top 20 bet. I love the way that he's been playing. All the reasons that you're on him for an outright, it's the same reason I'm on him on a top 20. I'm getting plus 170 on that to get him inside the top 20. So again, these huge numbers aren't going to show themselves, but tickets that I like. I also have Christian Bezuidenhout, however I've heard it every 9 different ways pronounced, but you're getting about plus 250 on him. You can probably find a little bit better as well, about plus 250 on him to finish in the top 20. I really like his skill set for this course as well. I don't necessarily love the win equity for him, but I do like the top 20 type finishes. And so you're going to find me on these guys that, it's not fun to be sitting there and going like, okay, well, I guess I'll grind out this plus 110 on Abe Answer and this plus 170. But Stephen, I mean, listen, it's the way I've been a profitable golf bettor for a while now. And I think these are the type of bets that you should almost, and I say this, I think you should almost focus on these as much as you put into anything else that you do, because these top 20 bets really and truly kind of keep you afloat.
Yeah, for sure. And mindset too, right? With this market versus outrights, where if you follow a golfer and you know he's a guy who misses a lot of cuts but has also won a couple times, that's not a guy you typically might want to bet for a top 10 or a top 20. The poster child for that is Bryson DeChambeau, right? Mm-hmm. The other thing I will mention is it's getting eerie, man. Like, I didn't know how deep you wanted to go on outrights, but I have an outright ticket at 60-1 on Christian Bezuidenhout too, and you got him in the top 20. And then, for the rest of my other bets here, basically, I took the inverse approach of you. I have 3 guys who were really clean across the board. Great profiles in the model I'm using this week, with the exception of being terrible putters. Mm-hmm. The first is Russell Henley, like we talked about. He's plus 290 to top 10 this week. That's one I popped in. One of our favorites, Mr. Keegan Bradley, plus 410 to top 20 this week. A guy who, if he could just be an average putter, he would have so many more wins on tour this year, because his profile is just elite in ball striking and on approach. So he's number 3 over the last 50 rounds for me this week, despite being one of the worst putters in this field. And the last guy, a top 20 bet, Emiliano Grillo at plus 500. Basically, a carbon copy profile-wise this week from what I saw with Keegan Bradley, with also just being a little bit worse putter. So that's kind of where I'm at with this. I'm hitting guys who... right?
You'll see why I'm smiling. This is just amazing. Let
me guess, you got a long shot on Grillo?
Yes. So this is absolutely amazing. Guys, a couple of head-to-heads I do have in the account as well. I did play Seamus Power over Billy Horschel. Again, I like the way Power's playing. I think that it's a little bit, I think golf guys understand how good he is, and he's really on the up and up here. So I did have Seamus Power over Billy Horschel. One of the other head-to-heads I have in the account, I'm playing. So obviously, if I'm on Gooch and think he could win this tournament, I have Gooch over Harris English as well in a head-to-head. So be sure and take a look for that. And if you can find, it depends on where the odds are. I was able to get Corey Connors at plus money over Sung J M. Now, I think that's pretty tight. I think that's I don't know if there's a ton of edge there, but I was able to get plus 110 on that. I don't know where it is at a lot of the other markets out there. But again, if you can get plus 110, if you can get a plus money bet on Connors head-to-head with him on Sung Jae, I'd play it. If it's anything less than that, I'd probably go ahead and pass. But I do have those head-to-heads in the account this week as well. So let's talk long shots. This is what everybody loves, Stephen. They want to bet a little to win a lot, and I get it. I hit a couple last year as well. It is a super awesome feeling. It's fun. It doesn't happen very often. But let's go ahead and take a look here at the long. And yes, one of mine already. Absolutely. You busted me. You knew it. You saw it. You read yes, Emiliano Grillo is one of my long shots here in this one, and it's for everything that you said. He actually is in the top. If I look over the top 20, if I look at the last 24 rounds, Stephen, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. There are 9 golfers ahead of Emiliano Grillo in my last 24 rounds model. He is 10th overall in my model. And so if that ever happens, I am always putting in a long shot outright ticket on a guy like that. If he is hitting the vast majority of the categories that I'm looking at, but there's probably like 2 of them, like there's probably to climb that high, he has to be hitting on the majority of the stuff I'm looking at. And then to be still in that 10 range, he's got to be really bad at a couple of things. And as we mentioned, look, he putts horribly. He's 127th in this field. You know, I mean, like he putts absolutely horribly. But maybe he can just get it rolling for 4 days. So, yes, Emiliano Grillo I have as a long shot. Brian Stewart, Stuard, if you have not heard of him. Brian Stewart I have as a long shot as well. When you look at what Brian Stewart has been able to do, one, not only course history here for Brian Stewart has been really good, but if you kind of look over the last 36 rounds, so like some long-term results here. 4th overall in this field in fairways gained. 7th overall in good drives. Finds himself in that upper half in proximity 150 to 175. He's 46th. He's 34th in strokes gained putting. So he's actually in the upper kind of quarter of the field in strokes gained putting. He is 62nd in approach. So again, upper half of the field, but his odds are super, super, super long. And so that's the type of guy that if I can find those numbers, right? If I can find a guy like Stewart who fits kind of in the upper half of all of the things that I'm looking for at 130 to 1 or plus. I mean, you could probably find longer odds than even 130 to 1. Another guy I'm looking at that fits that range, Tom Hoagie, is another guy that, again, super high in my model. I actually think he's a super talented guy as well. Just needs to really put 4 rounds together, Stephen, and a guy that if you're looking at the models, again, hits in so many of the categories, but is just so bad in a couple of the other ones. But when someone hits in so many different categories, I love to put them in as a long shot. You can find him kind of in that 100-ish to 1 range, 90, 95, 100 on Hoagie as well. And then the last long shot that I have in this week, Joel Damon. And I guess it's not long shot. He's like 65, 70-ish to 1. Look, Damon is just a really, really good golfer. It's hard to take him seriously if you follow him on Twitter, if you follow him on social media. The guy's like always kidding and joking and whatever and all that. Like it's hard to take him seriously, but he actually is a super talented golfer. He played last week, which means he won on the tour. You had to win last week if you were to play, and he played last week, which means he has win equity. He can win tournaments. And so Joel Damon comes in as my final kind of long shot, and that's kind of a borderline because, like I said, he's like 66 to 70-ish or something like that to 1.
You're not alone on Damon because his odds have actually come down. As we record this Wednesday morning, he's mostly 50 to 55. There are some 60s still out there. I got a 60 on him too. I'm laughing again, man. I also have Joel Damon, and I also have Brian Stewart at 130 to 1. So, man, we are like simpatico this week. I love it. I didn't know how deep we wanted to go for long shots, so I'll just briefly mention I do also have a 70 to 1 ticket on Chris Kirk, who's top 10 in the model over the last 50 rounds that I'm using. A guy who literally had to finish T2 last year to maintain his tour status with a medical exemption that he was on, and he did it. So got a T2 finish at the Sony, albeit with those weird conditions last year that we talked about, but at least better than him playing like crap in those conditions. So 70 to 1, not bad on him. Couple other guys I'll mention. briefly here. You mentioned Brian Stewart. John Hasselbauer is a big fan of Denny McCarthy this week. If you look at very short form, he stands out in that regard. Top 10 over the last 24 rounds. He's another big short game specialist. Denny McCarthy at 80-1. And one other guy really deep. This is a guy I covered when I was working for the Korn Ferry Tour. Hank Lebioda, 180-1. Over his last 36 rounds, he's 12th in the model. Last 50 rounds, he's 19th. And he's a top 10 putter over those spans. So that's way up from 55th over his last 100 rounds. So this is a young player who the model is telling us is improving recently. And I will say guys like this, in a tournament like this at the beginning of the year, I will care a little bit more about recent form because these are the guys that are playing on the fall swing, right? Yeah. As opposed to some of these other PGA Tour golfers where it does really matter to them to play well and get FedEx Cup points so that they can maintain their status and play in tournaments for the rest of the year. So that's the last long shot I'll mention is Hank Lebioda at 180-1.
Let's talk one and done. This is one of the super popular ways to continue to bet golf. I mean, if you're not in a one and done pool, all I can say is you should be. They're super fun. It's you pick one golfer, and after you pick that golfer for that specific tournament, you cannot use that golfer for any other tournament for the rest of the golf season. So it is it's basically like Survivor. If you played NFL Survivor or something like that, it's basically like that. They just call it one and done over on the golf side of things. And there's some pretty big money to be won if you get in some of these one and done pools as well. Steven, I know you're in one, I'm in one. We're all playing some form of one and done here. I'll start with you here. What is your strategy for early on in the season? And then what guy did you end up on this week?
In a tournament like this, I'm in a big one and done pool, right? Like a lot of entries, hundreds of entries. So game theory comes into play here where in a big field like this week, I'm going to try and take somebody who is probably going to be a little less picked. So I'm going to steer away from the favorites like Cam Smith and Sung J M for that reason, but also because those are two golfers that I could see myself using down the road here in other tournaments. So
Sung J, just for everybody, if you've never played a one and done and this is your first year getting in, Sung Jae is like your wild card in one and done. You want to hold on to him as long because he plays somehow he plays 60 golf tournaments a year. I don't know how he does it.
He doesn't have a home. He lives in hotels. He travels with his mom. He's a pure golfer.
Yeah, he's your wild card. Like you want to hold on to him as long as you can because you're gonna look up one week and it's gonna be some crap golf tournament. You're like, oh my god, who am I gonna play this week? You're like, oh my god, Sung Jae's playing in this tournament. Like I can actually use Sung Jae. So like just hold on to him as long as you possibly can. He is like your wild card for one and dones.
Absolutely. So I mentioned it earlier, but I'll mention it again. According to Data Golf, Waialae Country Club is second only to Augusta National in terms of predictive course history. So this is a good spot to factor that in and past results to try and maybe find a one and done. To me, the most obvious choice is maybe Webb Simpson, short game specialist, a guy that I'm not going to want to use on a lot of other courses in bigger tournaments that are much more longer courses throughout the year. But I'm in a bigger, so if you're in a smaller pool, that might be the way to go. But I'm in a bigger pool where I want to take somebody that's a little bit further down the board. John Hasselbauer mentions there are 8 players with multiple top 10 finishes over their last 5 years in this tournament. Webb Simpson, Charles Howell III, Mark Leishman, Patton Kizzire, Kevin Kisner, Brian Stewart, Brandon Steele, and Chris Kirk. The names that overlap in my model this week that I'm considering would be Webb Simpson, Brian Stewart, and Chris Kirk. So I'm probably going to take a shot on Stewart or Kirk to open the year on my one and dones and probably be grinding my teeth that it didn't start last week when I would have had Cameron Smith in the Tournament of Champions.
Yeah, it's funny. So I'm in a big one that's got actually like thousands of entries, and I have 3 different, I have 3 entries into that one. So I'm going about it a little bit different. I'm kind of spreading my risk out evenly, like you just said. So I'm going to have one with Webb strictly because there's only a handful of places you can use Webb anyway. And so why not just go ahead and if I've got 3 different entries, I'll use him in one of them and then we'll kind of move on from there. I'll hold him in the other 2 entries for some of these other short tracks that maybe he could excel at. But yeah, I'll get him out of the way on one of those entries because like you mentioned, there's just not a lot Like,
I mean, like Harbortown, maybe.
Yeah.
There's just not many. You can count on one hand, probably.
Yeah, there's just not a lot with him. And I think with the second entry, I'm going to play some of these guys, like I mentioned, in this kind of middle-ish to long shot range, right? Like, I think I could find myself on a Joel Damon on one of these entries. I think I find myself on maybe even a Tom Hoge in one of these entries and stuff. And like, these are guys that, like you mentioned, these early season points are so incredibly valuable. They've been playing. They're if you follow these guys, like they talk about what they were doing in this offseason is working on their games and how they were really, kind of feel like they're dialed in or whatever. Like, I don't want to use a Connors, a Henley, a Gooch this early, because I think those guys, for one, I think they're on kind of the upswing, specifically Gooch. Like, I think Gooch by mid golf season might be a dude that we might be looking at some of these real big golf tournaments, right? Like, I think he's got that type of skill set where this could be a breakout season for him. And so I don't want to use him this early in this. And so I, like you, I think I'm gonna burn one on Webb. And then after that, I'm going to look at some of these longer shot guys in a Hoagie, in a Damon, maybe even, like you said, I might even look at a Brian Stewart as well, a guy who's had a ton of course history here as well, because again, first out of the gate here, you don't want to waste a big gun, and at the same time, you don't want to come up with a zero. So that's how I'm going to approach one and done this week at the Sony Open. Some quick thoughts here on DFS as we get out of here, Stephen. I mean, listen, DFS golf, super fun if you haven't played it. If you don't know how it works, you pick 6 golfers. Obviously, you want all 6 to make the cut. If you don't, you still move on. I mean, even if only 5 or 4 of your guys make it through, you still accumulate points all the way. It's just on those 4 guys as opposed to getting a full team of 6. And so, you get it, right? I mean, you want 6 guys to get through so that you can accumulate points all 4 rounds in golf. You'll be able to find some pretty decent values on some guys as far as pricing. Some of these guys that we like actually this week are some of the guys that are in some of that value range. I mean, Steven, if you look in that, $7K range, I keep mentioning Tom Hoagie, like he falls in that $7K range. You mentioned Denny McCarthy as a guy that John likes. He's in that $7K range. You mentioned Chris Kirk as far as a guy with course history here and stuff. He's in that $7K range. So I actually think you can build a nice nucleus of a DFS team this week, starting kind of in that $7K range, and then you're going to end up with a lot of money to kind of round it out with some of these guys that we really, really like.
Absolutely. That'll give you enough money to maybe include some of these bigger names if you want. Full disclosure, I'm not the DFS guy. I play in single entry tournaments because I don't want to go up against the sharks that are popping in hundreds of entries into these tournaments. So, but our golf writer, John Hasselbauer, on the site in his tournament preview every week does a great job of breaking down the player pool that he's using for DFS. So at the bottom of the Sony Open article and in subsequent weeks, you're going to find a nice little table with the guys that he's using in each price range. So that'll kind of guide you if you want to follow along and figure out the guys that he likes. There's also a link there to our sister site at playpicks.com where you'll see the 3 or more DFS values that he likes for that given week. So, but yeah, I'm with you. That's what popped out to me too. A handful of guys in that 7K range that's going to open things up. That's going to unlock your lineup this week to take a shot on guys like Abe Answer in the 9,000, or even the highest price guys in the 10K range of Webb Simpson, Cam Smith, and Sung Jae In.
Obviously, you and I on Seamus Power. We're on, I'm on Russell Henley as far as outrights go. Those guys can be had. Henley at 8.5K, Seamus Power at 8.1K. I think that those are pretty solid plays as well. I talked about a top 20 on Bezuidenhout. I mean, he's in that range as well. So I think there's some really, really solid players in that mid range if you want to head up there. If you look at the top priced guys this week, and you kind of start to see who's going to get the ownership, because again, it's different. It's pretty different whenever we start to figure out who's going to be super highly owned as compared to, who's just a good player, right? I think Abe Answer, because he comes in at 9.7, it would not surprise me if Abe Answer is one of the highest owned players of the week, because he's a solid 1,500 behind Cam Smith, 800 cheaper than Webb. He's, what is that? That's another 600 cheaper than Sung Jae. He's cheaper than Mark Leishman as well, Kevin Na, all that. So it would not surprise me at all if Abe Ancer is the highest owned player of the week.
You think Mark Leishman's going to be highly owned? I've seen a lot of people mentioning him on their outright cards this week.
Yeah.
It didn't really pop for me, to be honest with you, in the model that I was using, but it just seems like there's a lot of popularity with him this week.
Yeah, I don't know about the ownership just because of his price tag is sitting at $10K, where again, you look at some of these other guys and that we do like that is not necessarily that doesn't necessarily pop. But I mean, I've seen him, like you said. I mean, I've definitely seen some stuff on him as to maybe some people going to be on him. But I think that Abe Ancer is probably the guy that if I'm playing like a big field, large field GPP where I'm trying to really differentiate myself, I think Abe Ancer would be not on very many of my cards this week in that upper tier. Listen, if you want to go completely off the board and you want to be completely contrarian, Hideki is 10.6K. He is super expensive. And nobody is talking about him, Steven. Like literally nobody is talking about Decky. Like he is super expensive and no one is talking about him in this tournament at all. So I think if you want to go off the board on the one of the high priced guys, I think Decky would be the way to go.
Yeah, I mean, might be the class of this field, right? Masters winner. I think my memory's foggy, I think he won the Zozo in Japan, didn't he? Or came close. So yeah, I mean, you're not finding a player with more class in this field than Hideki at this point.
Yeah, so really like him. I think Keith Mitchell's an interesting way to kind of round out your card. If you're looking for like some really super cheap dudes, Brendan Todd is a guy. He can't putt worth a damn, but I mean, he's a guy that if he can find his putter, he's like super cheap. That maybe a guy that you could throw into a lineup to kind of round out a lineup as well, and just hope that he figures out how to putt over the course of the week. But DFS stuff also in the article over there on the lines and play picks and stuff as well. So, Steven, can't wait for this to get going. So looking forward to all of our golf content here over the course of the season. It'll be you, I, John. We'll get Brad back in here. We'll get Brett in here. We'll get everybody kind of coming in and talking some golf over the course of the season. So really looking forward to it. And good luck to you this week, my friend.
You too, sir. One of us is going to hit an outright, I think, which means the other one will hit like a top 20.
Yes, I know. We should. If one of us wins money this week, both of us should win something. So that makes me feel really good. Guys, of course, as always, if you're watching this on YouTube, go ahead, hit that subscribe button. Really do appreciate the support on the channel down there. And then let us know in the comments, how are you playing this thing? Who did we miss? What are we missing? Who do you hate that we said that we like? Any of the stuff like that, we're in for some conversation. Of course, if you're in for even deeper conversation, we got a Discord channel over there that we're talking golf in as well. So just head to the lines, upper right-hand corner, Discord button. Go ahead and join and come talk some golf with us over there as well. For Steven, I'm Matt. Good luck this week at the Sony Open.